Hello, and welcome to this discussion of the Hay Festival Book of the Month. I'm Georgina Godwin. Our choice for October is Bewilderment by Richard Powers, and if you'd like to buy the book, it's available for purchase on the Hay Festival website, or you can buy a copy from your local bookseller. Questions from you are welcome throughout the session. Please submit them in the Questions tab, and we'll do our best to get through as many of them as possible towards the end of the event. Thank you so much to everyone who's donated to the festival's Future Fund when registering for this event, and you can continue to support the festival by donating on the website. Richard Powers has published 13 novels. He's a MacArthur Fellow and received the National Book Award. His last book, The Overstory, won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, as was this latest novel, Bewilderment. He lives in the Great Smoky Mountains. Richard, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Where are the Great Smoky Mountains?
They're in southern Appalachia. They lie mostly between Tennessee and North Carolina. And interestingly, they weren't on my personal map in the United States. I'm not sure I could have pointed a finger directly at them before I discovered them myself on a research trip for my previous novel, The Overstory.
And so how did you come to live there permanently?
When I was reading for The Overstory, I read a great deal about trees. I read everything I could put my hands on and ended up reading more than 120 individual book-length studies of trees. And I became fascinated with the forests of North America, the four great forests that had covered the continent. And I was shocked to discover how little primary forest there is still left, uncut forest, virgin forest in the US, something on the order of 2 to 5% of the original forests that covered the continent. That's just sort of a stunning figure to me. And I kept reading that if you wanted to see what old growth forest, what eastern deciduous broadleaf old growth forest looked like, that the Smoky Mountains was a place to go, because it is the largest extant contiguous chunk of old growth forest that's left on the continent. And I arranged a short research trip there, a 3-day trip up into the southern Appalachians to see what primary forest looked like. While writing this book, I thought, I had to take at least a peek. I'm an Easterner myself. I grew up east of the Mississippi, and I thought I had a pretty good sense of what broadleaf forests looked like in the eastern part of the country. But when I got to the Smokies and I made my way up a trail through the recovering forest and into the old growth, it was stunning. From one step to the next, there really was a very pronounced boundary between the recovering and the old growth forest. And I've compared it elsewhere to that moment in The Wizard of Oz where the film goes from black and white to color. It smells different, it sounds different, it looks different, the light is different, the species count is way up. And it was a very moving experience for me. I thought, this is my first glimpse at a fully functioning, intact, healthy forest. This is my country's patrimony, and there's almost none of it left. And that impression, that sense of health and well-being that I got from walking through the old growth was so intense that 8 months later, I found that I was still thinking about it. And I thought, well, that has to tell you something. And I went back and I bought a house nearby. And I've been living there ever since for the last 5 years. And I've just had this remarkably wonderful, good fortune to have 500,000 acres of wilderness in my backyard, and 1/4 of that being this marvelous treasure of uncut primary forest.
And do you think that the location has changed you as a writer?
Well, it has changed me in every measurable way. It changes the way that I write, how I structure my day, and it certainly has changed what I write about. I wrote Bewilderment under lockdown, and it shows. I got locked down in this incredibly lucky place, and the Smokies really dominates this book. The book begins in that setting, it ends in that setting, and it is the dominant setting for the interaction between the father and son that comprises the bulk of the drama in the book. The way in which it's changed me as a writer has to do with the way that I structure my day. You mentioned that this is my 13th novel, and for the first 11 and a half, I felt pretty indifferent to place. I felt like my work as a novelist took me to places, both psychological and intellectual, that I really could write about anywhere. And I would wake up in the morning and I would get all the urgent business off my desk, and then I'd start working, and I would not leave until I had my 1,000 words. I was treating writing as a very product-oriented activity, and I defined myself as the person who could keep this regimen and produce books at that clip. In the middle of the overstory, when I did move down to the Smokies, my relationship to my work and the job of living where I live almost inverted. Instead of waking up in the morning and saying, make yourself into a writer, I would wake up in the morning and go out on the deck and say, what's happening out there? Where am I? What time of year is it? What's the weather? What are the animals doing? What's in fruit? What's in flower? Where is the best place to be right now in order to discover what this piece of earth under my feet is trying to do? And that, living there has become the priority, and everything that follows from that has become the bonus. I will say that being out in the woods and walking is so stimulating that it usually is the case that I don't have to go more than a couple of miles before my head is filled with voices and characters and scenes and sentences. And often I'll turn around and rush back to the trailhead in order to get home and jot down all the ideas that occurred to me in the forest. So I'm probably still producing at roughly the same rate, but the words are coming from the place and from my experience of being among the neighbors and in this texture of the more than human.
Can you introduce us to the three characters, two alive and one dead, at the heart of the novel?
The book is told exclusively in the first person by Theo Byrne, who's a 39-year-old astrobiologist. And, for those who haven't come across the term, astrobiology is a very young discipline. In fact, it didn't even exist when I was Theo's age. It's come on very quickly in the last few decades, and it concerns itself with the broadest questions about the possibilities and affordances of life. Under what conditions can life begin? How easy or difficult might that be? What are the extremes of circumstance that make life possible or impossible? Is it perhaps ubiquitous, or are we dealing with an extremely unlikely single case here on Earth? All of these questions about the broadest potential and agency of life taken in the aggregate. And of course, that means exploring all of these new exoplanets that have been popping up by the thousands now in the last couple of decades, and asking whether or not any of these places might be able to be a site for life, and what life might look like there. Would it have the same chemistry as ours? Would it be an entirely different kind of proposition? So that's Theo's day job. However, the bulk of his efforts are taken up with being the father of 9-year-old Robin Byrne. Robin is an extremely intense, unusual boy. He has lost his mother 2 years before the novel begins. Alyssa dies when Robin is 7 years old. And perhaps aggravated by the loss of his mother at such an early age, perhaps also a function of his intrinsic difference. Robin is having trouble. He's spinning out of control. He's recently attacked one of his schoolmates. He's experiencing great anxiety, great difficulty in controlling his behavior. And Theo, left alone to raise this boy by himself, is a bit at a loss. Alyssa, Theo's wife and Robin's mother, despite the fact that she is now 2 years dead, also haunts these pages. There's a kind of ghost story. She is very present in the memory of both Theo and Robin, and one never goes too many paragraphs without the memory of Alyssa playing some role in the father and the son's relationship.
And there's a beautiful passage quite near the beginning of the book that actually describes all that perfectly. And I wondered if you might read it to us.
Sure. This does occur on page 4 of the novel, so it is right at the beginning, and it's Theo meditating on Robin's problem and what the best way forward for Theo himself is in raising the boy. I never believed the diagnoses the doctors settled on my son. When a condition gets 3 different names over as many decades, when it requires 2 subcategories to account for completely different contradictory symptoms, when it goes from non-existent to the country's most commonly diagnosed childhood disorder in the course of 1 generation, when 2 different physicians want to prescribe 3 different medications, there's something wrong. My Robin didn't always sleep well. He wet the bed a few times a season, and it hunched him over with shame. Noises unsettled him. He liked to turn the sound way down on the television, too low for me to hear. He hated when the cloth monkey wasn't on its perch in the laundry room above the washing machine. He poured every dollar of allowance into a trading card game. Collect them all. But he kept the untouched cards in numeric order in plastic sleeves in a special binder. He could smell a fart from across a crowded movie theater. He'd focus for hours on minerals of Nevada or the kings and queens of England, anything in tables. He sketched constantly and well, laboring over fine details lost on me. Intricate buildings and machines for a year, then animals and plants. His pronouncements were off-the-wall mysteries to everyone except me. He could quote whole scenes from movies, even after a single viewing. He rehearsed memories endlessly, and every repetition of the details made him happier. When he finished a book he liked, he'd start it again immediately, from page 1. He melted down and exploded over nothing. But he could just as easily be overcome by joy. On rough nights when Robin retreated to my bed, he wanted to be on the side farthest from the endless terrors outside the window. His mother had always wanted the safe side too. He daydreamed, had trouble with deadlines, and yes, he refused to focus on things that didn't interest him. But he never fidgeted or dashed around or talked without stopping. And he could hold still for hours with things he loved. Tell me what deficit matched up with all that? What disorder explained him?
I mean, you go out of your way to not label him. You use the term neurodivergent. Why that antipathy to actually giving it any kind of diagnosis?
Well, Theo actually does bring Robin into the doctors, but as is often the case with parents of extraordinary children, he gets more than one diagnosis, and he gets changing diagnoses. And as a scientist, he concludes that this may be symptomatic of just how rough and uncertain the process of mental health diagnosis in children really is, and how fluid it is, and how sometimes, crude and approximate it is. And so when he does get the recommendation from at least one doctor to medicate his child and to control Robin's behavioral problems that way, which is quite common in the United States, he pushes back against it. For better or worse, he's saying he thinks that his boy is too young, his brain is still developing, and he's not ready to experiment on Robin in quite so drastic a way. And for better or worse, he makes this decision, and it has great consequences for the rest of the story. But this question of what is wrong with Robin, of course, slowly becomes another question, which is when Robin asks his father, what is wrong with adults that they're letting this world become what it's becoming and even pushing it along faster? Perhaps there is something in Robin's question that's just as valid with regard to mental health. And that also becomes the subject of the story.
It's really a love story, or in fact, more than one love story. Love stories, it happens on so many levels. And I just wondered if you'd unpack that for us and talk a little bit about the empathy that's at the heart of the book.
Yeah. So the first love story is certainly the love that Theo has for his boy. Although he admits to his own son uncertainty as a parent, and that he is improvising and stumbling forward and not always making the right choice, he would do anything in his power to protect Robin from the world and from himself, short of lying to him. And that's part of the problem as well. When Robin starts demanding answers about what's happening and why it's happening, Theo tries to give his best possible response. Alongside that love story of father for son is the love story of the son for his missing mother, who's been gone 2 years now. And Robin is desperate to hold on to whatever memories he can. And he makes his father tell old stories again and again. And, he wants to watch videos of his mother on YouTube and to hold on to her that way. And then alongside those two love stories would be a slowly emerging love story on the part of both of these lost boys for the world of the more than human around them, a recovery of the sense of their connection to the world beyond the human world. It's something that calms Robin. It's something that fits in with Theo's own professional exploration, and it's something that brings the two of them together. The increasing sense of just how much intelligence and strange alien life there is everywhere around them.
Then we come to neurotherapy, and that's, of course, the major plot device of this book. What is it?
So I first learned about this strange technique of decoded neurofeedback back in 2013. I think the technique itself is a little more than a decade old. The first research papers started to appear around 2010. It's still in its infancy, but it's growing rapidly. It's a number of different kinds of techniques, but the basic outline is that one person will have their brain recorded in real time by fMRI while they're performing a task or learning how to do something or participating in an emotional state. And that recording of real-time brain activity is saved as a kind of template. And then a second person, also being scanned in real time by fMRI, will be trained on that template, will be given feedback about their own neural activity, and that feedback will direct them closer and closer to emulating that state of neural activity in the template pattern. I've compared it a little bit to a game of blind man's bluff, where the machines are calling out, you're getting warmer, or you're getting colder. And the second person learns simply by being aware and attuned to their own thought processes when they are actually starting to become congruent with the thought patterns of the original person. When I first read about this, I just got goosebumps. It was the strangest thing. It just seemed like some science fiction postulate. And I thought, this is an empathy machine. If it ever came into a robust maturity, it could be this strange answer to the question, what does it feel like to participate in the thought processes of another person? We are deeply tuned to read other people. We are extremely sensitive to the smallest muscle movements in a person's face. As I look at you now and you look at me through this two-way portal, I can imagine that I'm participating a little bit in your emotional states. However, we're always uncertain because we're not sure whether we're getting the tip of the iceberg, whether we're reading correctly what lies below the surface. This machine would be a way of opening up and participating much more directly and robustly in another person's emotional state. And so I take this existing therapy that's used a lot now as a kind of treatment of PTSD and other kinds of trauma, and I just push it a little bit down the road. I use this kind of science fiction trope of the near-term future, and the reader, as they begin to read about Robin training on the patterns of other people as a way of learning how to control his emotional states, with luck, the reader is saying, could this happen? Is it happening now? Might it happen 2 years from now or a decade? Or is it completely impossible? So you enter into that slightly ambiguous, speculative fiction zone with regard to what exactly is happening to Robin and what result it could possibly have in his therapy.
And I don't want to spoil the plot for anybody who hasn't read it, so I don't think we'll pursue that. But
okay.
I wanted to ask about Flowers for Algernon, which also leans heavily on Plato. And I wondered if you might just tell us why that was an inspiration and remind us of that great classical work of science fiction.
Sure. So while I was telling the story of this 9-year-old boy who's undertaking this treatment, I realized that its ultimate effect would be as a kind of rapid training in emotional intelligence. It would take this 9-year-old who was filled with fear and filled with rage, acting out, unable to control himself. And, it would gradually, through this almost video-like game that Robin excels at, increase his ability, his emotional intelligence. And that he would be going from this state of wildness into this state of wonder and control. And it rang a bell with me. And I at first I wasn't quite sure why it seemed familiar. Right? I knew that somehow I was recreating some other story. And then it occurred to me, and quite wonderfully, that I was, in recreating Robin, I was channeling my own childhood in a way. And a story that I had read when I wasn't that much older than Robin himself. And it was Daniel Keyes' Flowers for Algernon, which I read when I think I was 11. And in that story, someone has a kind of science fiction intervention with regard to his cognitive intelligence and goes up the curve of intellectual ability and gradually, becomes a different person because of this, this enormous enhancement of his ability to reason and think. And I went back to that story, and I discovered that Daniel Keyes had used an epigraph, as you said, from Plato's Republic, and particularly the section of the Republic dealing with the allegory of the cave. And as most people remember, in the allegory of the cave, we're all chained in darkness, and we're facing the wall of the cave where, these shadow puppets are playing out dramas, and we're mistaking the play of these shadows for reality. And someone breaks out of the shackles and gets out of the cave and goes outside and, discovers the sun and realizes that that we are living in some kind of limited, closed version of reality. And there's this much bigger world outside. Comes back in, tries to tell everyone, and that doesn't go very well, as is often the case in stories that explore the limits of our ability to know where we are and who we are. And Plato says this famous line, as translated most classically into English, the mind, like the eye, knows two kinds of bewilderment, one going into the light and one coming out of it. So, as we travel from the cave into the brightness, we're blinded. And as we go from the light of day back into darkness, we're blinded again. And I thought, yeah, that is my story. It wasn't that I was recreating flowers for Algernon. It's that both Keyes and I were very interested in retelling the allegory of the cave and how we can glimpse the limits of what we can know about ourselves and others for a moment, and that's bewildering. And then we can lose that glimpse, and that's also bewildering.
So that was clearly the spark for the title. Although interestingly, right, there's an audience question from Nicola, she says, I keep thinking about the fact that the word bewilderment contains be wilder. Absolutely.
Absolutely. We have some negative valences for that word. We think of it as, confusion and disorientation. We can also sometimes use it in that positive sense of I'm bewildered, I'm bewitched, I'm bothered, I'm amazed. But I was going for that etymological sense of going back into a wild state, which is not altogether a bad thing.
Now, you have these parallel stories going on through the narrative about life on other planets, which is Theo's day job. And they come as bedtime stories for Robin. And they seem to get closer and closer to real life as the plot unfolds. And I just wondered if you could explore that for us.
Yeah. So it turns out that one of the very few things that calms Robin, and one of the very few spaces that father and son can have together, are these excursions that they make together in their imagination across the galaxy to various planets that are so different from our own. The planets themselves, Theo is drawing on this, explosion in his own science about the discovery of other worlds that lie beyond our solar system. And each one of these excursions that they take is to a planet that resembles planets that we have now discovered and verified. And the trick then is for the two, father and son, to say, what would life look like in these very strange places that are so different from us? So it's a safe place for father and son also to talk about difference. I mean, Robin is deeply traumatized by the loss of biodiversity, as many children are. He's kind of a pantheist. He believes in, he gives the more than human the kind of sanctity that most people only give to human beings. So he's deeply moved by this question of what would life do in these other places. For me, it was a recreation of a form that I love a lot, which is the planetary romance, the imaginative journey of, short interludes, like explored by Italo Calvino or Alan Lightman, these tiny micro chapters that are in a sense a novel all in themselves that only last a page or a page and a half. But I've interleaved them with the dramatic story. So when father and son go to these places, the reader can look at them and say, they're actually exploring their own hopes and fears in each of these places. And every place they go has something to do with what's happening to them in the story at that moment.
I mean, Robin asks, which is bigger, outer space or inner space? And that actually kind of goes along with, let me just find this listener question about philosophy. Isla says, I love the way you weave in philosophical themes in this book in such a way that anyone reading can understand. Is this something that you have to craft carefully, or is it a natural part of your writing style?
I take tremendous amount of pleasure in novels that like to explore thinking human beings on an equal footing with the exploration of deeply feeling human beings. And, I'm strangely structured myself, I think, and that gap between thinking and feeling has never been hugely pronounced to me. I see the two of them as functions that we've evolved adaptively to figure out how to respond to a rapidly changing world. And I think of feelings as a kind of very rapid style of thinking. And I think of thought as a kind of slow, reflective reconsolidation of emotions, and they feed on each other. So for me, I've always been attracted to writing a kind of fiction where both of those things are happening at the same time. And I can show human beings in the full robustness of all of these complementary and interdependent processes that are going on in their brains. I know that's a little unusual for a lot of people who have learned how to read novels that are very rich in exploring the affective interactions between people, and where the introduction of a lot of philosophy seems like a slowing down of the story. But what I've been trying to do over the course of these 13 novels, and what certainly lies at the heart of my goal in Bewilderment, is how to weave in philosophy not as an autonomous apparatus that's coming from me, Richard Powers, but that's very an integral part of these two characters. Theo needs philosophy to orient himself in the world and to help him raise this boy. And Robin needs philosophy in order to understand where he is in this absolutely bewildering adult world.
At one point, Robin has Theo's password and he sees really distressing images on the internet. And Theo, who's by now homeschooling Robin, wonders, how did real teachers handle this? How did they manage field trips that you write, field trips without faking the data or ignoring the obvious? Right. He says that the world has become something no school child should be allowed to discover. How do you deal with that dilemma? I mean, obviously, our children need to know what's happening. They are the ones who are going to have to take action. But how do we tell them without completely freaking them out?
Yeah, that's a horrible thought if he's right about that. Robin is very different. There's no denying, that his intensity and the way that he looks at the world moves him away from the mode on any distribution curve of kids his age. But in one regard, he isn't unusual, and that's the degree of eco-trauma that he's feeling. I believe that, both anecdotally in my life, but also based on studies that are coming out with increasing frequency, polls, that eco-trauma is one of the greatest mental health threats to young children. And it's not okay to tell them that everything's all right? Because that doesn't suit them well. I think the way forward is complicated but realizable. I think if we can explain to our children that there is a moment of great crisis, and that it is scary, and that certain old things are disappearing, but at the same time, that life is incredibly resilient. It has survived many mass extinctions in the past. The world has developed great resilience and invention, and that there will be a world in the future, and we will occupy some part of it, and there will be meaning and work for us to do in this new world. Perhaps rather than bombarding our children with the sense of desperation that we're feeling, and this, the sort of daily defeat, if we can alter our own consciousness and see the possibilities of engagement with a future that will look different from the present, will locate meaning in a different way than we do in our current culture, that message of fear and change and upheaval can also become one of possibility and recommitment and rehabilitation.
Yeah. Now, you wrote this book, as you said at the beginning, during the pandemic, and of course, in the dying days of the Trump administration. And in the work, there is this president who tweets and all the rest of it. And as you say, this is a near future novel. But I wondered how sort of living under that with Trump, with the pandemic, affected the work.
Yeah, very strongly. And I do try to play in the same way that I play with the kind of counterfactual or adjust the strength of what's possible with decoded neurofeedback. I also play with the geopolitics of the last couple of years. So as a reader enters into the book, there is initially this invitation to say, yes, I know where we are. We're in 2019 America, and I recognize the key players and the key events. But as the book goes on, as you say, the speculative fiction nature of the book starts to replace the literal, the journalistic realism of the depiction of the present. And I think the reader who says, "I know where we are," starts to feel a little unsettled, starts to realize that this book is diverging in some ways from a literalist representation of America in 2019, and is instead saying, wow, I have no idea where this is going to end. These things are on a different trajectory. I thought I recognized them, but now they're moving into a new place. And the purpose for that, I think, was to recover on these alternate trajectories, that same sense of deep uncertainty and distress that we were feeling at that time. None of us knew where this was going to land. I was writing this book under lockdown and watching the president begin to subvert the credibility of the elections months before the elections were held. I turned in the final draft of the novel. Actually, the last chance that I had to change any words at all was in October of 2020, just weeks before the election. So my speculation is entirely predictive about where we might have gone at that moment.
If he had a second term, yeah.
Yeah, and that sense of we're not on Earth anymore, we're on a parallel planet, was very much the feeling that I was having as I was writing this book. I didn't know which story was going to end first, mine or democracy in America. Mm-hmm. And for me, that same sense of dislocation, of bewilderment, that the intrusion of the geopolitical onto this personal story represents, is valid right now, because I don't see us as out of the woods. I see us in only an interlude, in an ongoing story. Everything that we despaired of and were frightened of in 2019 is still around.
There's an audience question from Garant who says, on the eve of COP26, many are viewing your novel as a call to action for our imperiled planet. What role do you think fiction can play in social change?
I see it as absolutely essential. I mean, not to take anything away from the people participating in the conference, but there have been 25 COPs before this COP, and there will be COPs beyond COP26. And we see how slow and reluctant the politicians are to respond in any concerted way to the kinds of recommendations and urgencies that come out of these conferences. Why? There's a line in my previous novel, The Overstory: all the best arguments in the world won't change a person's mind. The only thing that can do that is a good story. And this is a very strongly established psychological reality. We don't change our minds. We don't change our feelings through argument. We can't look at a graph and say, oh, I see, you're right. I'm going to change what I believe and what I feel. What happens instead is if we are invited to be someone else for a moment, and this is also demonstrated in very controlled clinical psychological studies. If we say, what if you were in a different socioeconomic category, or what if you were facing a different reality in your daily life? How would you respond? And then later on, the person who has been asked to do this exercise in empathy is much more likely to step back from committed positions. That's what art does. See, art and writing, stories, novels, they are the real empathy machine. They are those, they are our technology for asking a person to be someone else for a while.
I'd just like to ask a couple of Booker-related questions very quickly. People want to know that you've won almost every award going. What's the most important to you? And if you had to choose a shortlisted writer on that Booker list, apart from yourself, who it might be?
Oh, we were having such a pleasant conversation.
I know, I'm sorry, but I feel a duty to the book club members. But we will come back. We don't have a lot of time, but we will come back to our conversation in just a minute.
No, I'm teasing. It's a real thrill. I mean, I've won more prizes than I deserve, and I've been at this for a good long time, and I hope to be at it a while longer. I'm well into the bonus round, and whatever happens next week is all gravy for me. That said, I would be lying if I'd said that my cortisol levels weren't pretty elevated by the whole process. I have read all of the shortlist except for Nadifa Mohammed's The Fortune Men, which wasn't available in the States until December. So I got a copy of it when I arrived in England a couple of days ago, and I'm about halfway through. I'm deeply impressed with it. It's a stunning historical recreation, amazing density, amazing voicing. The control of the style is superb, and on a deeply important set of questions. And at the moment, I mean, had I read them in different order, if I were still in the middle of one of the other, I might be saying that's the one that's influencing me most profoundly right now. But I will say that every time I finish one of these novels on the short list, I thought, well, there's no improving on that. But also there's no comparing this one to the other one. And so I think, having gotten to this point, it's quite easy to sit back and say any one of these, is putting forward a kind of consummate realization of the reader contract that they present. And it's a real thrill to be in the mix,
Richard, finally, it's really a question about hope, how much hope you have for our planet, and whether that hope necessarily involves our species.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the first thing we always have to ask when we think about hope. Hope for what? If we mean by do you have hope for the future, are we going to be able to keep intact the culture that we've created, the way that we look for meaning, this kind of socio-political formation that we have right now? I don't have a lot of hope for that. And I'm not sure that it's appropriate to hope for trying to keep together something that is so profoundly out of whack and that has had such dire consequences for everything beyond the human. We're not going to get over the finish line with all our stuff. Right? That's the wrong thing to hope for. But if by hope we mean, as I mentioned earlier, how do we tell our children about what's happening and how not to be defeated by it? If by hope we mean a commitment to continue to engage the possibilities of a meaningful future, to me, that's easy, because I do think we are going to be part of the story for some time. I mean, I should say first, I have no doubt that life is going to survive everything that we're throwing at it. It has survived many mass extinctions in the past. And I do think that human ingenuity and the capacity to project and understand and respond to a changing world is so strong. This, the collective intelligence of the 8 billion of us is so strong that we will come up with ways of continuing our part in the narrative, but it will have to look very, very different. And that's, to me, that's the most hopeful aspect, because once we move meaning from where it is in this kind of human exceptionalist and commodity mediated and individualist culture that we have right now, where meaning is just something that each of us does for ourselves, by and for ourselves, to this sense of meaning being out there, being, rediscovering and reconnecting with this interdependent web of living planet, that meaning is likely to give us a more fulfilling life and more sense of possibility and satisfaction than so much of the saltwater culture that we live in right now.
If you haven't yet read Bewilderment, you absolutely have to buy it. It's available for purchase from the Hay Festival website, or you can get a copy from your local bookseller. I just want to tell you before we go that Hay Festival Winter Weekend is our next UK event. It's taking place live in person and also online from Hay on Wye from the 24th to the 28th of November, and tickets are on sale now. Very many thanks to everyone who's donated to the festival's Future Fund when registering for this event, and you can continue to support the festival by donating on the website. And you can hear this talk again on the website. You can also hear it again on Meet the Writers. That's my program on the station, Monocle 24. Finally, huge, heartfelt thanks, not only to Richard for appearing on this program, but for writing such a beautiful and important book. And very good luck for the booker.
Bless you, Georgina. It was a great pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, and goodbye.
Bye.